So Aristotle speak about 6 constituent parts of a tragedy. They are plot, the characters, the thoughts, that means the ideas expressed, diction, melody, and spectacle. So we will discuss each of these one by one, and we'll have a detailed discussion in separate chapters as well. So first he speaks about plot. About plot, Aristotle says that plot is the soul of a tragedy. There can be a tragedy without a character, but there can never be a tragedy without a plot. So plot is important, and plot means it's an arrangement of incidents in a logically sequenced manner. Okay, so there are a few features that a plot should have. For example, there should be completeness, and already when we discussed the definition given by Aristotle for tragedy, we found that how he was defining it as a complete imitation of an action, serious, complete, and of certain magnitude. So that what he speaks about, the completeness, the magnitude, are actually about the plot, because plot should be complete. There should be a beginning, and there should be a middle, and there should be an end. So that is very important in the case of a tragedy. We will discuss this beginning, middle, and end. Yes, this is what he says. There should be a beginning, there should be middle, and end for a tragedy. So the beginning initiates the main account in a way which makes on look forward. So there should be a proper beginning for a play, something that causes the beginning of a play, and that should naturally lead to the middle part of the play, where the reader understands what is already gone and what is going to happen next. Probably in the classical tragedies, what we have in the beginning is the chorus comes, and they sing a song about what happened before the play actually begins, so that the reader are introduced to the story. That is how usually a play began in the classical period. And in the middle also, the chorus appears, and they sing about what is already gone, and they would comment upon what has already happened, and then they will also predict what's going. They will just give a hint at what's going to happen next. So there will be a middle and also the ends, where after that nothing is going to follow. So the reader will get an impression that the middle presumes what has already gone before, and it requires something to follow. The reader has an impression about what is going to come next. And in the end, in the modern times, we speak about open-ended plays and all, but in the classical play, that would be a closed one. The reader or the audience do not have anything else to expect from a play. It is closed. It has a proper end. So according to Aristotle, the plot should have this beginning, this middle, and the end. So talking about the plot, we also understand that it should have the magnitude. That means the length of the play, and Aristotle speaks about that. The length should not be within the unities that he speaks about. So unities are important. Aristotle speaks about 3 unities. They are the unity of time, unity of place, and unity of action. So the play should be the entire act, the whole action and incidents must be revolving around with a central action, and there should be unity of there should be 3 unities. Aristotle speaks about 3 unities that a play should observe. They are unity of time. That should be the unity of time, unity of place, and unity of action. So unity of time means the play should cover the incident which takes place in a single day. That means that should be in a single revolution of the sun, 1 day or 1 or 2 hours or something. It should not go beyond that. Then only the audience can actually accept it as something feasible. They can relate to it. That's one point. And secondly, he speaks about unity of place. That means the action should be limited to one single location. For example, one scene or one episode takes place in one country, the next episode is in another country, the audience might be wondering how was it possible in those times. You just think about the classical period before Christ, when there was no transportation facility as we have it now. So it was impossible for a person to travel from one place to another place, which is mile away from this place. So the audience would not be able to accept it as something natural. So therefore, according to Aristotle, there should be unity of place. The action should be limited to a single location. But more important, Aristotle has given more importance and emphasis on unity of action. He says in Poetics that all parts are so closely connected that the transposal or the withdrawal of any of them will disjoin or dislocate the whole. That means, there should all the actions of the characters, everything that is played on the stage should be concentrated on a single action. That should finally end the, that should finally reach the tragedy of, the tragic incident of the play. So Aristotle has given more importance to this unity of action. So all the characters, there may be minor characters, major characters, but all their actions should ultimately lead to the final result. Many critics have questioned the observance of three unities. They all have given importance to unity of action. For them it was indispensable, inevitable for a play, but they were really skeptical about the importance of unity of time and unity of place. And according to the critics, probably who after the Elizabethan period and all, they did not believe that was so important. For example, Dr. Johnson, when he analyzed the Shakespearean plays, one of the charges against the Shakespearean plays was that Shakespearean plays did not observe three unities. And according to Dr. Johnson, they were not really important. You don't have to observe unity of time, unity of place. Only unity of action is important. Even about unity of action, when we talk about Elizabethan plays, for example, that was not just centered on one particular plot. There were double plots sometimes. There was one subplot also. For example, in King Lear, we have the story of King Lear and his daughters. Along with that, we have the story of Gloucester and his sons Edmund and Edgar. And these stories are intertwined and they are connected well. So there are two plots. But according to Aristotle, there should be only one single plot in a play. So that's all about the unity of three unities that Aristotle actually spoke about. And he also says about a well-determined structure. The play should have a well-determined structure, and the theme that is conveyed through a play should have some kind of a universality. That's also related to that. The story, the incidents that are portrayed through a play should have some universal effect. For example, when a play is produced, in the 21st century, if it is, for example, going to be staged in the 22nd century, maybe after 100 years, that should be still relevant to the people who watch it. Similarly, the play that was composed and that was staged first before Christ, or maybe after that in 13th century or 14th century, when it is watched by the people in the 18th century and 19th century, it should be equally appealing to all these people, irrespective of the age, the geographical differences, the cultural differences, etc. That is universality, because the theme that the play or the tragedy has focused on should have relevance to every member of the audience. So that is also important, universality. So these are some of the things we have to think about, a plot. And the second thing that Aristotle speaks about as one of the 6 constituent parts of a tragedy is the characters. And he identifies that there are some qualities that the main characters should have in a tragedy. Especially he speaks about the tragic hero who is more important. And the tragic hero, according to Aristotle, should not be an angel-like character, should be devoid of any kind of vices, and he should not be an infallible kind of a person who is incapable of committing mistakes. Because if he is such an angel-like character, an infallible person, audience can never relate to him, so that his downfall cannot arouse pity and fear in the mind of the audience, and therefore it will never lead to catharsis also. So therefore the character should not be an angel-like character. Similarly, the character should not be an out and out villain also, because if he is an out and out villain, an absolute villain, his downfall will only bring happiness to the readers. It will only give a kind of a sense of relief to the audience. So therefore also it will not serve the purpose. So according to Aristotle, the tragic hero, the protagonist of the tragedy, should be a person who should not suffer from any kind of moral depravity. It should be a nobleman, and the downfall or the tragedy occurs to him is not because of any serious crime that he has committed, but because of hamartia. Hamartia means an error of judgment, or what we can say, a tragic flow. So that would be the only defect we could find out in the character of the protagonist. Nothing else should be there. He should not be an angel-like character, nor should he be an out and out villain, but he should be an ordinary noble person, a good-hearted noble person, and his tragic incident that he met in the play was because of should have been because of the tragic flow or the hamartia. That was the term he has used there, hamartia. So that's the only thing that should bring about the tragic effect in the play, not because of any moral depravity. When we talk about Shakespearean heroes, tragic heroes, we find that all of them suffered some kind of hamartia. Shakespearean character, for example, Hamlet had the tragic flow of procrastination. Hamlet wanted to take revenge upon the death of his father. He was getting a lot of chances, but he was deliberately procrastinating that. A kind of indecision that was haunting him throughout the play, to be or not to be. That was the question. So this to be or not to be kind of an indecision, and therefore the procrastination was the tragic flow that finally brought down the tragedy upon him as well. And second, when we talk about, for example, Othello in Shakespeare's play Othello, the kind of what you can say gullibility or the over-credulousness, that was his tragic flow, because he believed everything that was perpetrated by Iago, and he was forced to smother his wife, beautiful Desdemona. And of course he realized it late, it was too late, and he committed suicide in the end. And when we talk about, for example, Macbeth, he was such a valiant, good-hearted person initially, but the vaulting ambition actually brought down his fall. That was his tragic flow. Or when we talk about Sophocles and others, Aristotle was so much familiar with the plays of Sophocles and others. And the next point is the thoughts, that means the ideas expressed. That's a third constituent part of a tragedy. And of course we know that action springs from thoughts, or the effect of speech is articulated by a character. There are beautiful dialogues, soliloquies, sides in the play, and all these things are so beautiful in a play that heightens the effect of a tragedy because of the underlying thoughts behind that one. So thoughts are really important in a play. The verbal and non-verbal impact of a tragedy is because of the thoughts which actually it carries. So therefore, according to Aristotle, thoughts are also important, and that's a third constituent part of a tragedy. And now we come to the next one, the fourth constituent part of a tragedy is diction. Diction means the language, we can say. So the nature, the type, the quality, and the aptness of vocabulary used in a tragedy should be appropriate to the context of the play, should be appropriate to the characters. For example, what's a royal character should not speak the language of an ordinary person, or an ordinary person should not have the language of maybe a character who belongs to the aristocratic class. So everything should be related to the context, everything should be appropriate, the quality of the aptness of vocabulary used. For example, the speech made by a scholar should not be same as the speech made by a literate person. So everything should be related to the context, should be appropriate. So diction therefore becomes one of the important constituent part of a tragedy. And also we know that embellishment, Aristotle speaks about that in his definition, embellished with each kind of artistic ornaments. So the embellishment of the language with the help of metaphors and other literary devices are also important in a tragedy. So therefore he attributes he attributes diction as the fourth important constituent part of a tragedy. And melody or the song are the fifth constituent part of a tragedy. So in the ancient tragedies, maybe at the time of Aristotle and others, chorus was more important. Even at the time of Elizabethan plays also we may find sometimes this one. And there were also verse dramas, poetic drama, etc., where also the songs were really important. So especially the singing of chorus. So chorus at the time of Aristotle and others, in Greek plays there were chorus singing in the beginning of the play, and they would explain to the reader through their song what has happened before and the context of the beginning of the play, etc. And they would come in the middle, and they would comment on what's already happened on the stage and what's going to happen. They will also hint at what's going to happen next, as I've already explained in the previous part of it. So therefore chorus adds to the unity of plot. That is very important, as we have already said. So Aristotle counts melody or song as the fifth constituent part of tragedy. And Aristotle gives little importance to the sixth constituent part of a tragedy, that is a spectacle, because it is not directly connected to literature. Actually, it is something related to the way some scenes are staged, how something are presented. And even without spectacle, a reader would be able to read and enjoy a tragic drama. According to Aristotle, a play is good when it is enjoyed more when it is read than it is being staged. So spectacle was not given much of importance by Aristotle, but it is still one of the six constituent parts of a tragedy. Because in some scenes we find that, for example, Oedipus Oedipus' eyes were torn out. How it would have been presented on the stage. So all those things were important. But in the later stages, when we talk about expressionism and all in the 19th century and the 20th century, even spectacles were important. But at the time of Aristotle, they were not given much of importance. Still, it is counted as one of the constituent parts of tragedy, as I've already mentioned. So from the sixth constituent part of a tragedy, we now move on to the chapter 9, where he discusses the difference between history and poetry. Of course, this has been dealt by Philip Sidney also in his Apology for Poetry, where we will discuss the difference between historian and a poet and a philosopher, etc. It was earlier taken up by Aristotle. We will come back to different parts of the tragedy and all those things in the coming chapters. But now we just switch back to chapter 9, where he actually discussed history and poetry and the relative merit of poetry, naturally. So he says that history deals with facts of the past only, whereas poetry presents the ideals of life. History only tells us what a king did, what really happened to a particular dynasty, how a civilization actually collapsed. But we do not get an idea why it happened and how it happened. Actually, the ideals that worked behind a particular action was not an area that comes under the purview of a historian. A historian does not try to does not probe into the mind of the people. He only looks at the external incidents and just narrates it in a matter of fact way. So, because history only deals with the facts, whereas poetry presents, or a poet is concerned with the ideals of life that actually propelled those actions. Then history just describes what it was, as I just said, whereas poetry reveals how it happened and why it was happening like that. So, how and why of incidents are really the aspects which only poets could explain. Maybe with the power of their imagination, maybe because of their intuition, maybe with the power of their what you can say insight. A poet is able to see the cause and effect relationship of various things. So therefore, history, as I told you, is concerned with the facts and incidents, whereas poetry deals with ideals and emotions. Okay. Poet is a creator, therefore he is called a maker in a Greek language. So he creates things. So these are this is the gist of what Aristotle actually discussed as the difference between history and poetry, or a historian and a poet. So Aristotle naturally places poetry above history. It is of more advantage than that of history, because it does not just describe what really happened, but it would help enable us to see how it happened and why it happened, and probably we will be able to look at things more wisely. Chapter 10 and 11 in fact discuss nature of plots, as well as the plot and its three parts. So we've already made a discussion on these kind of things when we initially talked about 6 constituent parts of a tragedy in the previous slide. But we will look at these things again. So Aristotle in this chapter, 10th chapter, speaks about simple plots. And simple plots are those plots where the action progresses continuously, without any twist and turn, and it directly leads to the denouement, and at the end of the play the story simply unravels and it reaches the end. That is what we call a simple plot. Whereas in a complex plot there are a lot of unexpected occurrences of events, twists and turns, surprises, astonishing turn of events, and finally it reaches the end of the play. So those kind of things plots are called complex plots. And Aristotle says a complex plot will have these three features in it: peripeteia, anagnosis, and suffering. Aristotle says that there are three important parts for a plot. They are peripeteia, anagnosis, and suffering. So peripeteia means actually a sudden change or a reversal of things in a play. For example, something is smoothly going on in a play. Suddenly something happens to the character, because suddenly something happens, that completely changes the turn of events, the progress of action, and there comes the tension, and everything gets upside down, and that affects the play completely. So those things may happen in a play. For example, the sudden reversal of things. For example, the play that Aristotle also discussed, Oedipus Tyrannus, Oedipus Rex, we can say, the main character, the protagonist, Oedipus Tyrannus. When he knew about, when he had an oracle that about his parents, that he would kill his father and he would marry his mother, he ran away from his adopted parents. Actually, his parents had the same oracle, and therefore they sent the children, that boy alone. He was sent away to be killed. So, but he was actually brought up by the farmers, and Oedipus thought that these farmers were his real parents. So everything was going very smoothly when he had an oracle that he happened to hear that he would kill his own parents and he would marry his mother. So in order to escape from that, he actually escaped from his foster parents. And when he was indulging himself in hunting, he happened to have a duel with a person, and he killed that person. And the person he killed was actually, his own father. So that was the peripetia in that play. So something done in blindness defeating its own purpose. The protagonist Oedipus Tyrannus wanted to run away from the scene in which he would kill his father, but he did that mistakenly. And the anagnorisis is something when there is a discovery or recognition of some of the facts in the drama. For example, when we talk about again Oedipus Rex, the play by Sophocles, where Oedipus Tyrannus discovers that about the real, about his real parents, how he actually killed his own father and he married his own mother. So all these things was a sudden discovery when there was a famine and all those things. The farmer came, and it has come to light that he had killed his own parents. He had killed his own father, and the present wife is actually Jocasta was really his mother. So that was the anagnorisis. So that actually brings about major change in the tragedy, and that finally led to the suffering. So, that Jocasta committed suicide. Oedipus actually was plucking out his ears because he is no longer able to see this world. So so these three things are happening in a tragedy, especially a tragedy having a complex plot in it. Peripetia, that means something, a reversal of fortune, we can say, a sudden change, something done defeating its own purpose. And there is anagnorisis, where there is a discovery of or recognition of some facts in a play, and because of that discovery there is suffering. So these are the three things Aristotle counts as the three parts of a plot. In the chapter 11, Aristotle discusses the components of a tragedy. And according to Aristotle, a perfect tragedy has got three parts, such as the prologue, episode, and the exode. So the prologue, as we know, the introductory part, the first segment of a drama. And episode actually consists of incidents presented between two choric songs. And immediately after the prologue, there is a parole, Parole, which is actually the entrance song of the chorus. And after that, the chorus comes in the beginning, immediately after the prologue, and then in the middle, and also in the end also. So the episode consists of the incidents presented between two choric songs. As we know, every now and then the chorus enters and sings commenting on the characters. So before that, the pack of incidents are called the episode, and finally the exode that follows after the last choral song. So before that, we have the statismon, Stasimon, that is a choric song presented in the middle of a tragedy. And we also have the Commos, Commos, that's a lamentation song sung by the chorus and actors together. So basically these three things, the prologue, the introductory part, the episode, the incidents, a series of incidents that happen between two choral songs, and the excerpt that follows after the last choral song in the end of the play. So that is what he discusses in the chapter 12 of his Poetics. Chapter 13 discusses the perfect plot of a tragedy and the ideal tragic hero. We already discussed that in connection with the previous chapter, so we don't wish to elaborate those things. And one thing we have to understand why these things are actually spread in separate parts, because actually Poetics, as we have now with us, is actually a compilation of the lecture notes which were compiled by the disciple of Aristotle. So they were not clearly written in the book form. Therefore, because of that, there are a lot of repetitions in different chapters and all. So anyway, we've already discussed the qualities and nature of a tragic hero, hamartia, etc. Chapter 14 actually discusses, spectacle and tragic emotions. So we've already discussed spectacle as well when we talked about the spectacle as the sixth constituent part of a tragedy. But there are questions of the possible connection between spectacle and tragic emotions. Spectacle means, the way the incidents are shown on the stage. And tragic emotions are, we know that pity and fear that would lead to the catharsis. When pity and fear are aroused in the mind of the reader, that would lead to the purgation of the minds, that would purify the minds of the audience. So if spectacle causes tragic emotions, the arousal of tragic emotions, what would happen if a reader who reads a play, will he get those in tragic emotions aroused? So that's a question. So anyway, this has been debated, and Aristotle discusses this one, the connection between spectacle and tragic emotions, where what causes the arousal of tragic emotions. We know that there are different things. When the downfall of a tragic hero would lead to the arousal of tragic emotions in the mind of the what you can say audience or the spectators. For example, we have a scene in Hamlet. The Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were killed. They were deliberately sent to death by Hamlet. But that was, according to the critics, that would not have aroused pity and fear in the mind of the audience, because audience did not relate to these characters. But later in the 20th century and all, there were a lot of discussions about it. And what happened with that, there was even a play, an absurd play on Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. So that's a different thing. Anyway, Aristotle discusses in this chapter the spectacle and its connection with the arousal of tragic emotions. The chapter 15, Aristotle again speaks about characterization. In fact, we already discussed character in connection with the 6 constituent parts of a tragedy, but I'm just repeating those things. The characters must be good, his speech should reveal a moral purpose, his conduct should be appropriate. Conduct should be appropriate in the sense that if he is a prince, or if he is a king, or if he belongs to aristocracy, the language should reflect that kind of a conduct. His behavior should be reflect that kind of an appropriate demeanor and conduct from him. If he belongs to the lower class, like a slave or a servant or something, that should reflect that kind of a behavior from him. And it should be true to life, so that the readers and the viewers should be able to relate with the character. They should be able to understand it as something real. It would appear to be realistic. The character should be consistent throughout. There should be a consistency in the character being presented on the stage. For example, if he is presented as a villain, he should be presented as someone who commits villainous acts throughout. If he's a noble character, usually he will be presented as someone who is doing noble deeds. So there should be consistency throughout. And Aristotle also discusses denouements that we will discuss in the succeeding part of the slide. And chapter 16 also discusses anagnorisis, in detail, the discovery or recognition. We already discussed that one. And chapter 17, Aristotle has a discussion on 3 rules for the construction of a plot. So Aristotle says that a dramatist should remember 3 factors while constructing the plot of a tragedy. 1, he should visualize the actual scenes of a drama. That means, he should be able to understand, what are the things, he has got to include, and what are the things, redundant scenes and incidents that he can actually discard from a play, for which he should be able to visualize the play completely. And second part is, he should be able to act his story with every gestures of the characters. For example, then only he will be able to use the right kind of language which is appropriate to each context in the play. So he should be able to even act his story with every gestures of the characters. And number 3 is that, the poet, or we can say the dramatist, should be able to simplify the story of his drama, and he should do away with all the unnecessary episodes and all. And the episodes and the plot should have the proper beginning, middle, and end. So therefore, he should be able to compress the entire action into the time limit permitted by the play. So these are the 3 things Aristotle has discussed in the chapter 17 as 3 rules for the construction of the plots. See, chapter 18 discusses the complication, denouements, and 4 distinct species of tragedy. Complication and denouement, that is very important. For example, a play has what we can say 3 important aspects that we can just write here as the exposition, then the complication, and we can sometimes even say the catastrophe, and we have the denouement. So these 3 things are important. Exposition means, the beginning of the play. When the play begins, of course, the readers or the audience should be told about what happened before, the context of the beginning of the play. That is the exposition. For example, when the Hamlet, the play by Shakespeare, began, we find the appearance of the ghost, and the ghost tells Hamlet about the death of the senior Hamlet, the king senior Hamlet, and that takes us to the story. And the readers are convinced of the need of revenge, what Hamlet tries to, what junior Hamlet, what the prince Hamlet tries to do, etc. So that is the exposition. And the complication of the catastrophe is when Hamlet is fully convinced of the fact that, his uncle Claudius was responsible for the death of his father. That means, he murdered his father. And this has been completely revealed to him when he, managed the staging of the play there, play within the play, that is Mousetrap, and there were many other occasions also that made him convinced about it. Even Claudius was aware of the fact that Hamlet knew about the death of his father, so he would take revenge against him. And Leatis also was there. So that was the catastrophe. And the denouement was the end of the play when when Hamlet kills Claudius. His mother takes the poisonous drink and she dies, and also Hamlet also dies. So that is the denouement, the end of the play, the final unraveling of the things. Denouement actually means denouement actually meant the unraveling or unknotting of the things. Okay, so that is the end of it. So Aristotle discusses in this chapter the complication, the way things have reached the crisis, and from there the end of the play, the last part of it. Okay, from the climax to the denouement. And so that is discussed in the play. And another aspect is four distinct species of tragedy, he says. So according to Aristotle, there are four different species of tragedy, four different types of tragedy, we can say. One is a complete tragedy, where we have the peripetia and ignoraces are rightly handled. There was an incident where there was a reversal of things, and that has been discovered. All these things are present in a particular tragedy. That's a complete tragedy. And then there's a tragedy of suffering, where we find death, injuries, wounds, everything are presented there. And then there is a tragedy of character, where the tragedy happens because of the tragic flow or the hamartia in the protagonist of the play that brings down the tragedy. And then there is also a tragedy, which is caused because of the arousal of pity and fear in the audience. The way something is staged. In some tragedies, when it is read, it would not have any effect. But when a particular play is staged, that would arouse pity and fear, affecting the catharsis in the mind of the audience, so that only because of the spectacle, only because of the way it has been presented, the way it has been staged, that would create what you can say, the arousal of pity and fear. So that is the tragedy of spectacle. So Aristotle identified these four species of tragedy: complete tragedy, tragedy of suffering, tragedy of character, and tragedy of spectacle. Chapters 9 to 22, Aristotle discussed diction. We already discussed diction. Diction means language that is used in tragedies. And Aristotle talks about alphabet, syllables, conjunctions, articles, nouns. They were all part of dictions in tragedy. And he also said that there were two kinds of words. There were simple words and double or compound words. And according to Aristotle, diction could be divided into 6 categories. Number 1, words used in ordinary speech. Then words used in ordinary speech, we can say. Words used in ordinary speech. Similarly, a second point is actually the foreign words borrowed from other languages, and similarly metaphoric words, we can say metaphorical words, which are used extensively in a play, for example, bloody sun, copper sky, etc. Then ornamental expressions. Fourth one is ornamental expressions. And fifth one is new coinages, which the dramatist make in his play. And the words, last one is the words which are not new, but words which are modified by the dramatist. The modification may be with respect to the pronunciation or the spelling or the alluded meaning, etc. So these things are discussed by Aristotle or in the chapter 22nd in connection with diction. Chapter 23rd, Aristotle discussed about epic poetry. This is epic poetry. Epic poetry, which we already discussed, and we also discussed the similarities and differences between a tragedy and epic poetry. Similarly, in the In the next chapter also, that means in the 24th chapter also, he made a comparison between epic and tragedy that we already done, we have done it in the previous slide. So I'm not elaborating that one now. And chapter 25th, Aristotle discussed actually the Aristotle's responses to the critics' questions. So the questions on impossibility, on irrationality, immorality, contradiction, and technical correction. And regarding impossibility, Aristotle says, at times impossibility will have to be allowed to a certain extent in a work of art. Aristotle cites the example of Hector being pursued by Achilles in Homer's poem. This is impossible and marvelous, and it can be allowed in poetry. So there is something that we can sometimes call poetic license. And irrationality, how far can a poet be irrational while portraying something? And according to Aristotle, that is also possible, because what is irrational in one age may be rational in another age. And poetry is of universal value, therefore there is nothing permanently rational or irrational, therefore it can also be allowed in a tragedy conditionally. And about immorality also the same thing happens. It is the context that decides whether whether an act is immoral or moral. So therefore also it has to be used very judiciously. And then about contradictions, Aristotle says, if a play is found to have certain contradictions in it, the critic should look at various interpretations which are available about a play, and they should try to correct it instead of pinpointing the mistakes and celebrating it. And also Aristotle speaks about Aristotle response to the queries made by other critics regarding technical corrections. So he says a writer will have to maintain technical corrections as much as possible, where a metaphor or a strange word sometimes is used out of necessities of poetic art. So there may be ambiguous expressions, all these things sometimes may be allowed in the context of a poetic license. But beyond that, if there are technical corrections, a dramatist should come forward to do that. That was his opinion about that. When we sum up the major points discussed so far in this presentation, we can say Aristotle, we learnt about him, how he was a tutor to Alexander, how he was one of the most famous and brilliant disciples of Plato, and how he gave a befitting reply to some of the serious charges made by Plato, his master, against literature, especially in his work Republic. How Plato charged literature with immorality, a corruptive force, something which is twice removed from reality. Aristotle tried to argue in favor of literature, how literature is acting as the greatest moral, how literature actually serves the moral function. Another aspect that Aristotle discusses is about the imitation. Imitation is very basic to human beings, that is instinctual, and through imitation man learns, and through learning man finds pleasure. So that is the origin of poetry and tragedy, etc. And Aristotle has also extensively discussed the difference between tragedy, epic and tragedy, what constitutes an epic, how epic has all the elements of a tragedy, but how tragedy is superior to an epic. And Aristotle also discussed the 6 constituent parts of a tragedy, that means the plot, the most famous one. In the case of plot is the arrangement of incidents, where it has an element of incidents. A dramatist should observe 3 unities, that means unities of time, unity of place, unity of action, and a complex plot should have peripety and anagnorisis in it. Peripetia means something done by a character, which would defeat its own purpose, and anagnorisis is the discovery of that one. Aristotle discussed all those things there, and also he discussed the second constituent part of tragedy was the character, where Aristotle in fact talked about the qualities of a tragic hero. It should have only a hamartia, a tragic flow. It should not be an angel-like character, nor it should not be a villain. And then Aristotle discussed the thought. Thought actually gives power to the action. So diction, the type of language to be used, should be consistent. It should be appropriate to the context, etc. And the song or the melody that is usually sung by the chorus also has been discussed by Aristotle in his Poetics. And also finally the spectacles, the way things are staged. So Aristotle's criticism that appears in the form of Poetics is really relevant because Aristotle has been the pioneer in this art of criticism. He has been able to explicate various aspects of fine arts in general and literature in particular, though he did not use the word literature. And drawing the footsteps of Aristotle, we have had many other critics also. Even in English, we have Philip Sidney and maybe Dr. Johnson and others who also were influenced by some of the ideas that Aristotle actually postulated in his work Poetics. So with this I conclude this presentation. Thank you.